Okay, so today we're going deep on something pretty heavy. You brought us this sealed indictment against Sean Combs, and this looks like it goes way beyond music.
It really does. Yeah, this
Yeah.
indictment is, it's dark. It alleges racketeering, sex trafficking,
Yeah.
and this goes back decades.
Decades. Wow. Um, it's hard to ignore how many times this indictment lists out all of his aliases: Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy Love. It's like they're really trying to emphasize just how different his public persona might be from what's in this document.
Right, and that goes back to this term they use throughout the Combs enterprise, and we need to understand what that means because it's not just his companies. It suggests something much more calculated and organized.
So help us understand then, what does criminal enterprise actually mean in this context?
In legal terms, it means an organized structure that exists to carry out criminal activities.
Hmm.
And the indictment is saying that Combs didn't just use his companies, right, like Bad Boy Entertainment or Combs Enterprises, but that they were actually like the framework of this alleged criminal enterprise.
So it's being alleged that his companies weren't just like involved, they were the actual tools of these alleged crimes.
That's exactly it. And it gets more disturbing when you see the claim that it was his employees, people who worked for these companies who were allegedly used to carry out these activities.
Wow. Okay, so not just the businesses, but actual people potentially caught up in this alleged web. And it takes an even darker turn when you get to the part about this alleged pattern of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, all aimed at women and other people around him. It claims that this was a method of coercion, a way to protect his image and keep his actions hidden.
And that's where we see this legal term coercive control come in. The indictment is saying that these weren't just isolated incidents, that Combs' alleged actions were part of a larger pattern of control.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly does coercive control mean in this context?
Basically, it means that the alleged abuse was calculated. It was a way to control people, to manipulate them, to coerce them into doing what he wanted. The indictment alleges manipulation, threats, physical violence, all to get his way.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, there are accusations of striking, punching, dragging victims. There's even this incident from back in 2016 at a hotel in Los Angeles where Combs was allegedly caught on video kicking, dragging, and even throwing a vase at a woman who was trying to leave.
And that incident was publicly reported on, which adds another layer to all of this. It is, it's hard to reconcile these allegations with the public image that he's cultivated for so long. And obviously, we have to reiterate, these are just accusations. This is not an endorsement of his businesses or his music or anything. But the indictment really does paint a disturbing picture.
Yeah, it makes you rethink everything. And it doesn't stop there, because then we get into these allegations about what the indictment calls, and this is a quote, freak-offs.
Freak-offs? Okay, what are we even talking about here?
So the indictment describes these as elaborate, allegedly orchestrated sex performances, and they often involved male commercial sex workers. And they weren't just private events either. Meaning Combs is accused of arranging travel, sometimes across state lines, sometimes even internationally, for women and these male sex workers to participate in these freak-offs.
So this is where the wealth and influence comes in, allegedly making all of this possible.
Yeah, it seems so. And to make matters even worse, the indictment alleges that drugs were also a factor in all of this.
He's being accused of drugging victims.
Well, the indictment claims that he would distribute controlled substances during these freak-offs, potentially to keep victims, compliant, vulnerable.
It's sickening.
It is, and it gets even more disturbing. Because remember, back in 2024, law enforcement searched his residences, right? They allegedly found a horrifying amount of what they call, quote, freak-off supplies.
What kind of supplies?
They found over 1,000 bottles of baby oil lubricant. They found narcotics. It really paints a grim picture of what was allegedly happening.
Yeah, it does. And we're not even done yet, because on top of the physical sexual abuse allegations, the indictment claims that Combs used even more insidious tactics to control these victims. It sounds like what we were talking about before with coercive control, but even deeper.
I think so. And this part of the indictment really outlines this behavior that seems like it was intentionally designed to trap victims, keep them in this cycle of dependence and fear, making it nearly impossible to break free.
Okay, so what were these tactics? Can you give us some specifics?
Well, the indictment alleges that Combs would lure victims in with promises, promises of career opportunities, making them a star, that sort of thing. And then once he had them close, he would allegedly exert financial control.
Classic abuser tactic, unfortunately.
It is, yeah. The indictment says he withheld financial support, dictated how they could spend their money, even monitored medical records.
That's terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. And it allegedly didn't even stop there. We're talking tracking their whereabouts, controlling their housing arrangements, even supplying them with drugs, controlled substances. It was all about maintaining control, allegedly.
Creating this situation where these victims felt completely trapped, that they couldn't refuse any of his demands without risking absolutely everything.
Precisely, that's what the indictment is claiming, that the victims felt they had no escape, that if they tried to get away, they'd lose everything, their livelihood, their security, their safety.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps the most disturbing part is the lengths Combs and potentially others allegedly went to silence anyone who could expose him.
Which is where the accusations of witness tampering and obstruction of justice come into play, right?
Right.
And those are serious accusations. We're talking alleged threats, intimidation, manipulation, bribery, all just to keep people quiet.
Yeah. And if the indictment is to be believed, it didn't stop there. It even claims that Combs recorded conversations with victims and witnesses, coached them on what to say, fed them a fake story to hide what was really going on.
So on top of everything else, he was allegedly trying to control the narrative.
That's certainly the implication. And it adds a whole other level of seriousness to these accusations.
Okay, so taking all of that in, and it's a lot, let's actually get to the charges themselves, because this indictment is very specific. It's racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. And these are incredibly serious charges.
They are. Very serious charges, and the indictment very clearly lays out the California penal codes it's using for these charges.
We're going to get into the specifics of those in a bit, but first...
Before we go any further, we should highlight just how much potential evidence the indictment mentions. This isn't like one or two accusations, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about alleged patterns of behavior over decades, and it's backed up by witness testimonies, physical evidence from those searches, maybe even video footage. That's right, yeah. And with those charges, racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution, it's hard to even get your head around, what happens next? What does this actually mean for Sean Combs?
Well, these charges could mean very real, very serious consequences. I mean, we're not talking about a slap on the wrist. This is potentially decades in prison and major fines. But there's another thing here that's really interesting, the possibility of asset forfeiture.
Okay, unpack that for us. Asset forfeiture, what does that even mean in this context?
So basically, if Combs is found guilty, the government could seize any assets they can prove were connected to the crimes. We're talking money, property, cars, businesses, anything linked back to these alleged activities.
So, theoretically, they could go after parts of Bad Boy, Combs Enterprises, all of it. It's possible. It really hinges on what evidence comes out of trial, how the court rules. And it's important to say here, these are still just allegations. Combs is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely, yeah. But the implications are massive, not even just for Combs, right? I mean, if even a fraction of these accusations are true, it points to a truly huge abuse of power, potentially a network of people covering it up. This case could send shockwaves through the entire music industry.
No question. And it raises some really uncomfortable questions about the industry as a whole, how could something this big, this systemic, allegedly go on for so long? Were people afraid to speak up? Did they know and look the other way? Were they afraid to challenge someone as powerful as Sean Combs?
Yeah, it's a lot to process. And we haven't even really gotten into the California penal code cited in the indictment.
Right, let's get into some of the specifics. So the racketeering conspiracy charge, that falls under California Penal Code 182, which basically targets people involved in organized crime. They often use it in mafia cases, but applies to any group doing illegal stuff for profit.
And that seems to be the key here, right? This pattern of illegal activity. The indictment really emphasizes that these weren't just random incidents. This was a scheme driven by money, power, who knows?
Exactly. Then there's the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion charge, and that's California Penal Code 236.1. This one's really important because it lines up with those allegations of manipulation and threats and coercion we were talking about before. It's about how Combs allegedly used his power to exploit people.
And it's important to remember that coercion doesn't just mean physical force. It can be psychological. It can be threats to their career, their reputation, anything like that.
Right. It's a lot broader than just physical force.
Right.
And finally, there's the transportation to engage in prostitution charge under California Penal Code 266. This one connects to those freak-off allegations, specifically that Combs arranged travel across state lines and internationally just so people could engage in commercial sex.
And it seems like the prosecution is building a really multifaceted case here, right? Using different angles to address different aspects of these alleged crimes. It's not just individual acts of abuse, it's this potential system of exploitation that was allegedly going on.
That's a key takeaway here. Because look, beyond the legal stuff, beyond the charges, this indictment brings up bigger issues. Accountability, power dynamics, our responsibility to speak out against these kinds of abuses. This case could be a game changer, and not just for the music industry, but for any fields where these power imbalances exist.
And we also have to remember, this is just the beginning, right? It's going to be a long, complicated legal process. A lot more to come out, evidence to be presented, and of course, Combs will have the opportunity to defend himself against all of this.
Of course, and it's going to be interesting to see what Combs and his lawyers do, right? What kind of defense will they use? Will they try to discredit the alleged victims, the witnesses, or will they say Combs didn't know what was going on?
Impossible to know for sure, but one thing's for certain. This case has everyone's attention, and people want to see how it plays out. This isn't just about Sean Combs. This is about holding powerful people accountable. And with that said, it's wild, right? Like, this whole thing, it makes you think about the weight of these accusations and how different they are from the image we have of Sean Combs, especially after all these years.
Yeah, it really shows you how we can't always separate, the artist from the art. Like, we might love the music, but then this case comes out and it's like, are we really seeing the whole picture? Who is this person, really? And then it goes beyond Combs himself, right? It makes you think about accountability in the whole entertainment industry, everywhere, really.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's not like these are the first allegations against Sean Combs. For years, there have been whispers, rumors, but they never really went anywhere. Do you think this time is different? Like, is this a turning point?
I think it could be. I mean, this isn't just rumors anymore, right? This is a formal indictment, serious charges. That's a whole different level. Whether or not he's ultimately found guilty, it's already got people talking about power, about abuse, especially in industries like music where there's so much wealth and influence,
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think about the impact of all this? Like, will this make other people come forward? Could this be the start of a real reckoning in the music industry?
It's definitely possible. I mean, this case could inspire others to share their own stories. They see people coming forward in this indictment, and it gives them courage. It could be huge, not just for music, but for any industry where power dynamics silence people, especially the most vulnerable.
Well said. This whole deep dive, it's been disturbing, for sure, but it's been really eye-opening. It reminds us that we don't always know the whole story, and sometimes the truth has to come out, even when it's hard.
I agree. No matter what happens with the legal stuff, I hope this case at least makes people talk, not just about Sean Combs, but about how we can make things safer for everyone in every industry.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Does this case change how you view your own responsibility to hold powerful figures accountable, even the ones you admire? Think about that.